I look around in our society today and I'm deeply disturbed at how many people don't read or consume news from various types of sources. I am a hardcore conservative because I've spent my life talking to people and reading what the other side has to say.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the 435 podcast. I'm your host, Robert Macfarlane. And today we had Carolyn Phippen. She is running for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Mitt Romney here in Utah. And it was a great conversation. We covered a lot of territory. We talked about election integrity, which is important to a lot of the Washington County Republicans here. We talked about foreign policy and what's going on in Ukraine. We talked about her life experience and why she feels that she's been put in this position right now to run for the Senate seat. It's an important seat. But we hope you get some information to help you make a great determination on who to vote for come November. Enjoy this episode. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. Keep supporting us. We're almost at 400 subscribers, so we're so grateful for all the support we've gotten from our sponsors and things like that. Keep us going. Enjoy the episode, guys. We'll see you out there. We've decentralized media and journalism. And that single thing is so complicated, which is partly why I think there's a massive communication breakdown between the public, like the public and the elected officials and the government. Yeah. We have this massive chasm of communication because it used to be that the journalists and the media were the bridge. Yep. But it was a centralized bridge. Right. And it was a fairly honorable one, and that is completely gone. Yeah. The honor in it, and then it's decentralized. So then it's in a bunch of different silos where just everybody's talking in these little tiny groups, right? So you have to go on 25 podcasts when it used to be you could go on KSL and CBS and you'd get the whole state and everybody'd hear your message. It's just not that way anymore.
But the piece, I agree with you, but the piece of that, and this still exists in traditional media, and that is they will still choose to only cover those who they really want to. Right. And like we've had to fight for some things. My comms person has had to say, why is Carolyn not mentioned in this article? Yeah. Or why are you calling her a political activist and everybody else a U.S. Senate candidate? A political activist. I have worked in politics for, 15 years. I've gotten paid for being a professional on this stuff. Right. And you use term political activist when it says U.S. Senate candidate before every other candidate in the article. And they changed it. But we have to notice that stuff and push back. That's one of the big problems of centralization.
Do you think it's because one person prints it that way and then they just copy? Well, do you think it's like a lack of they don't? There's no originality in it, and so they're just like, oh well, this person, this outlet said it this way, so I'm just going to take what they said and say the same thing. Because you listen to the media, and a lot of times they literally are. It sounds like they're reading from the same script. And my thought is, it's less of this puppet master because there's the conspiracy. It's like, oh, they're all getting the same script as much as it is like, oh, there's no originality. They're just like repeating what the other person has already said. AP News releases it and they don't put their own spin on it or their own thought into it. They just say, oh, whatever AP said, I'm going to say. Yeah. I think that's kind of what it is, right?
Not exclusively.
You don't think so?
No. I know not. Okay. In this particular instance that I'm telling you, it was a local paper and they were the only ones saying it. So I know it originated from there, but I also will say, I'm going to give you an example. This is one of the problems so I will acknowledge fully the problem that you talk about when you have your media not centralized. I almost said not somewhat controlled because centralization requires some control, which also necessarily gives you some ability to manipulate if you choose to, right? And that goes on. So when I was working for Speaker Hughes at the Utah House, when he was a new speaker, I was working with a guy. We were starting a new department and as support for the speaker and the House majority. And there was a report that was put out. And this guy who I worked with, had been in the media as a journalist for almost 30 years. Okay. So he knew that world.
Yeah.
He'd done some other things subsequent to that before coming up and working with me there. But there was a story that was published in a newspaper, and it was about an incident, if you want to even call it an incident. It wasn't an incident, but some things that had occurred on the House floor. Okay. That is all filmed. And it was very inaccurately represented. And it was all on film for anybody to check out. So he calls the reporter and says, dude, like he'd been in this world. He knows these people. No problem. I'll call. We'll get this corrected. He calls, hey, this is a problem. This is not how that went down. And by the way, it's on film. Like I can show you right where to find it. You can take a look. Nah, not interested. So he elevates it and goes to the editor. Thank you. Really, my words are gone today.
No, that's okay.
Goes to the editor.
It's a team effort.
Thank you. Effort. Yeah. Oh my. So goes to the editor, same complaint, and didn't present it as an antagonistic complaint or anything, right? Like, hey, I have this concern. Take a look. I can show you where to find it. It's on film. All was recorded. That is not how this went down.
Yeah.
No, we're standing by our story. And then do you know what they did? They started targeting the speaker because we were complaining.
Oh my gosh.
So you see this play out. That is I think that's why people celebrated a break away from this centrally controlled media, because we have people, and this is just human nature, right? When people have power, too often people want to control what other people think or see or understand or even talk about. I mean, we're at a place where I know people personally. Some I have decent relationships with, but they literally want to control other people's conversations in a really unhealthy way.
Well, and not only that, but then even in that journalistic, like with journalistic integrity, let's say they print a correction. It's not like they put the first one on the front page and then they put their correction in page 9, right? Or they put it so far away to where they're like, oh yeah, we corrected that, but no one, it's gone. The news cycle's over and no one is going back to that. Nobody's getting in that. None of that's getting any attention. So there's no check and balance to it. There's no check and balance. So you have this, we go from this centralization of media and information and journalism and journalistic integrity. And now it's decentralized. We have podcasts, we have social media, we have newspapers, we still have the television, right? We have all these different places. And as a candidate running, I can't help but think it's got to be more difficult today than it was 50 years ago to run. Do you think that's true, or?
It's hard for me to say because I'm not even 50. I'm just kidding. I'm over 50. But
yeah, I don't know. Like, it seems like maybe your experience of maybe this isn't really a conversation that you've had with anybody in the past, but it does seem like I've had a lot of candidates in here because I covered all the city councils for St. George City, Washington City. I covered the District 2 congressional race last year. So I've had just a bunch of candidates in here, right? And the glassy-eyed, I didn't sleep very much last night. Like this energy level, you can see, man, it's wearing on the candidates. It's a tough thing to do. It's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. Right. That's for sure.
But I wouldn't blame that on the media. So, or I wouldn't even blame it or fault the current media environment for that, because I will actually say that when it was centralized and there was the ability of one or two people to control what news got through, I think that's still worse than what we have now. Okay. Because now at least there are opportunities like this, and there is a group of people who listen to that and can share. And it gives, the reason people are so tired, I would say the main reason is, for instance, I drove, luckily somebody drives me just about everywhere, right? But we drove down to St. George yesterday after I had meetings and phone calls all day.
The nicest ladies, by the way. Who are they? Who are those ladies?
That was Debbie and Carol.
Shout out to Debbie and Carol if you're listening in.
Yes, they are awesome. And they came down this morning because we have had events all day and we have one more after this. And we're driving back to Salt Lake tonight because I just want to sleep in my bed and be home with my family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my chickens, by the way. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
But yesterday, it was somebody else. It was Brooke who drove me down.
Okay.
She was here, spent the morning with us, and then she headed back because there's a big party at her house tonight.
Okay.
And like it is all this juggling. Hey,
Yeah.
who can take me? Who can send me back or go home with me? Who can be here for this? Like, because here's the thing. There are 4,400 delegates, and right now this is a delegate race, right?
Mm-hmm.
New ones will be elected March 5th. But regardless, even after coming through convention, I need to be in front of people everywhere I go.
Yeah.
So I am holding multiple meetings every single day.
Every day.
Talking to, like today, it will be 4.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to groups of people. I really got to a point earlier today with another one where the meeting ended and a lot of people were still talking. And I probably had 4 of my staffers and volunteers there talking to people afterward. And I just went over to one of them after a few minutes and I said, my eyes can't stay open anymore. I'm just going to go out to the car. You guys can keep talking, finish up. The meeting was over, so it wasn't being rude, but literally it is just being in front of so many people. So I will tell you, this decentralized model allows, if I can get 200 people in one shot instead of 10 here, 20 there, 30 there, 10,
Right.
it is a lot less work.
That's true. That makes sense.
Right. So even though it's a lot, there are a lot of different media entities, and I understand what you're saying about, and
I'm grateful for it because I think I wouldn't have this opportunity otherwise. Right. So I definitely am grateful for it. That's for sure. I couldn't tell if it's made it more complicated or less complicated. But to your point, this gives you an opportunity to where you hit, let's say 10 people have podcasts. Like I listened to the UVU interview you did.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a ton of views. And a lot of the videos and podcasts I do don't get, thousands of views all the time. But at least it's a big chunk where you can have this 1 hour can go and stay on the internet for as long as it needs to so that you can have that place to go back to for people to do research and find more information, which is kind of why I started the podcast, because in Southern Utah, there's nobody, the Spectrum News doesn't really cover that. We have St. George News, but they don't really cover politics. We don't have a news outlet. So this was kind of how do we fill the void? How do we fill the gap for people to go, one place to get their kind of dose of local news, right? And know that in Southern Utah, they're going to get the Senate candidates. They're going to get, the candidates that are really going to be impactful to them, in one place. So that's kind of where it came from. So we kind of rolled into that. Let's take a step back.
Okay.
You went to University of Utah and BYU. Mm-hmm. I think there's only one not running that hasn't been from BYU, which I think is funny. You have 5 kids, 5 boys.
5 boys.
I have 3 boys. Okay. So need some tips later on how to raise just boys. I only have sisters, and my wife only has sisters. So we didn't even have the boy thing. But anyway, so I think that's a success. How old are they?
So my oldest is 30.
Okay.
So 30. Here's the thing. I can't even keep track anymore. But like 30, 28, 24, 18, and almost 16 in a couple
almost
weeks.
16.
Yeah.
So he's still home. 18-year-old still home?
18-year-old, he's the one who's Ryan's age. Mm-hmm. So 18-year-old is a senior. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Ryan's my nephew.
Yes.
Just got his mission call. He's going to Mexico.
Yes, I saw
Did you see that?
Yes, and Mitch, my son, wasn't able to be there for that. So anyway, he and Ryan used to play lacrosse together.
Yeah, that's what my sister was saying. Yeah.
And Mitch is actually going down to BYU. He'll serve a mission right after graduating, and then BYU has already accepted him to play on their lacrosse team as their goalie when he comes back.
That's cool.
He's the Corner Canyon goalie, 6A state champions last year.
Canyon.
Better replicate it.
They better
this year.
Lacrosse has become big in Utah.
It's so fun.
It is fun to watch.
Everything else is boring after watching lacrosse.
It is kind of. You're right.
There's so much going on.
So much. It's like it's like football and basketball crossover,
combined.
Right? Right? It's kind of.
But can I tell you, my 30-year-old played as well, and and. Lacrosse, like I watch it and I can tell who scores. Like I'm really good. I can get down in the weeds on policy all you want politically. But if I watch an athletic competition, I know that somebody scored a goal. I can tell if someone blocked it or whatever. My son will, after the game, he'll say, "Hey, Mom, did you see this, that?" I'm like, "What? happened there? I have absolutely no idea.
Like the construction of plays and things like that.
But I saw you had some good blocks there.
Yeah.
Very good. You caught that ball, honey. So no, it is funny how all of our brains work very differently.
They do. They definitely do. So that's an accomplishment. Getting 5 boys up and out of the house, I think, is a big accomplishment. Right now, I think you work as, I guess, a big part of your time goes towards I'm drawing a blank on the organization.
Freedom Front.
Freedom Front.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
tell me a little bit about that. I went to the webpage. I was trying to understand kind of what it is. It seems like a lobby type, like there's specific, goals that the organization, it's a coalition of business owners. Maybe just correct me if I'm wrong, that's driving towards a couple of specific things that they want to see happen within the state legislature. Or maybe help me understand.
I'll help
what it
you
is.
on that. So we do work on legislative issues. I will say I left that job probably about 5 months ago. I'm on the board now.
Okay.
But I know there is some stuff out there that still has me as the executive director. But I'm not. But what we work on is issues of individual liberty and free markets.
Okay.
So
that's right.
Preserving free markets and preserving and growing individual liberties, because we saw a massive overreach during COVID. That's where a lot of these business owners started getting really concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is absolutely untenable. Most of my board originally was made up of tech entrepreneurs, but some of them had friends who were in other businesses, more retail kind of businesses, and saw like OSHA coming in and doing inspections if someone wasn't wearing a mask. And like, there was no place for these businesses to turn.
Right.
So for us, we do work on legislative issues, but it's a 501c3, and which is a charitable organization. The focus is education based. So education for the public. We hold a number of events throughout the year on specific things. We brought, for instance, Secretary of State Cord Bird from Florida out last summer. That was one of the last things I did before leaving. Brought him out to the state of Utah to talk with elected officials, both state legislators and county clerks, on some of the election reforms that they had done in Florida, because that's fundamental to us being able to have our civil liberties protected, is ensuring that there's confidence in our elections. And there are always things that we can do to make these things better. And as things change, I mean, I'll just take 1 second on the election front. As technology changes, anybody who is at all technological understands that there are more opportunities for interference the more high tech you go, as if you are not very conscious of those opportunities, right? And the more we consolidate data, that's a big thing that we were working on this past year or last year. The more we consolidate data in the hands of a few players, the more it can be misused. There's a big bill going through the state legislature on that this year that will put a framework in place so that there are more checks and balances on the data that government has. And in my view, that applies to the data that they hold for our election systems. By the way, when you get a driver's license, the state sends off your information to an organization that is focused on voter registration. You went to get a driver's license.
Yeah.
Right. So things like that. We are not entering into these basically contracts with the government too often with an understanding about what that data will be used for. I'm getting a driver's license. As far as I know, that data should be housed within the driver's license division, the DLD. And if you want to use it anywhere else, I think you should have my permission. So things like that. So for us, it's an educational, the main part of what we do is educational to the public, and then educating legislators so that they can make good choices as they legislate, especially on those particular issue areas.
That's really actually fascinating. We could go a million different directions with that.
Yes, we could. I
have so many questions and so many thoughts running through my head. One thing I will start with, though, is because, and this is something that I think it's enough to where I can see opportunities for foul play in the election process in Utah in general. For what I know of it, I think there's opportunities where I can see how the elections might not be fair. But in Southern Utah specifically, I hear this a lot, especially with the really far right conservative groups they're really concerned, and I feel like there's some honest concerns about how we've ran elections. Just in Washington County specifically, what election reforms do you see? And I know as a senator, this isn't necessarily something
right.
So it's taken a little bit away from this, but I know somebody listening in is going to want to know, what is your opinion on the current election process, whether it's national or whether it's state or whether it's local? Maybe where do you see things maybe need to change, or should they stay the same? Like, what's your feeling on that?
So I'll tell you, the big thing that I was focused on over this past year, up until the time that I left, and I've still been a bit focused on it just at a personal level, even after I did leave Freedom Front as the director, is the issue of, again, going back to data. How are we cleaning our voter rolls, right? Because there's an entity that is responsible for giving us information. We send them all of our data, including the DLD data. We send all of this to them, and they have a two-pronged mission. They recently, as I started digging around, got us opted out of the voter registration piece, which they've never allowed, to my knowledge, another state to do. But I think it was illegal for us to be engaged on that. I found a law and started asking questions. And so they opted us out in December of that piece. Or they got permission from the organization to opt out of that, which, like I said, they don't usually grant. That was their number one mission as an organization. So the second is cleaning voter rolls. But here's what they do. And this is less than 1% of the problem that we have with voter rolls. So, or let's say this. Less than 1%, when fraud is uncovered, less than 1% of it is this piece, okay? The organization is ERIC, E-R-I-C. And what it does, so we send them all of this data, voter registration, DLD, other states do the same. Only about 25 other states are ERIC members, and about 10 other states have withdrawn their membership
just
in the past two years.
Yeah, just recently, right?
Yeah. So all they do is take our lists and run them against lists in other states. The largest states in the nation are not ERIC members. So Texas withdrew, Florida withdrew, California has never been a member, New York has never been a member. Those are the most populous states that we have, and they are not ERIC members. So we have, I think it's somewhere between 22 and 25 states currently who are ERIC members. So our data is being run against those. And if there are people who have either applied for a driver's license in another state or registered to vote in another state, that will be flagged. That is all ERIC does.
Okay.
That is almost nothing. When you look at what the potential for a lot of it isn't even fraudulent. It doesn't start as fraudulent activity necessarily, but some of it does. It's incorrect information in our voter data rolls. And I'll give you examples. So there is somebody who has done an analysis in some states, Jay Valentine. We brought Jay Valentine. I'm a member, I'm on the board of Utah Citizens for the Constitution. That organization brought Jay Valentine here a couple months ago. And one of the things that he does, and this is just a piece of what he does, he works with large organizations to find anomalies in data, okay, through his system, mostly large power companies to monitor grids. But he's also helped states with his same process that he does to monitor electrical grids. He has also applied that data analysis. You know, they run stuff through supercomputers or whatever. I'm so not techie. And they're able to find anomalies on like Medicaid and Medicare rolls and all kinds of other government services, right? But it's a matter of how much data you have in. Well, the ERIC system, first of all, we give away all our data. People don't know that. And I should have an opt-in, opt-out, I think. But even bigger than that, so we give it away and they send us back a list. How do we know that that list is accurate? I've asked that question and I don't have answers. Well, people told me so. That's not good enough for me. I want to know what they are doing with that data. And we don't have real assurances. I have really asked a lot of questions on that over the past year as I've met with government officials on that, and I can't get solid answers. So
before we go, because this makes a whole lot of sense. But why can't we just show up in person and do it on a single day? Why have we thought, why do we think that the technology is actually making this easier? Because it sounds like to me, we made this way more complicated than we did for 150 years. It seems like we could do this way simpler, and the technology is not making it simpler. Yeah. Is that fair to say?
That is very fair to say. That is very fair.
So why do we keep going? Why is it a we can't admit that we made a mistake? Is that the problem? Or it's like we've gone too far. We can't turn back now, right? Like I don't know why there's so much difficulty
resistance.
Being like, yeah. Truthfully, like when I hear people ask people, especially candidates running about the election system, you've been the first one that ever has given me any like real answer to it, or I've heard them. They shut it down. They stonewall it. They basically say, I don't think there's a problem.
I know.
And I'm like, what do you mean you don't think there's a problem? How could you not think that there's a problem? Like it seems so obvious.
Right. Well, here's the bigger problem to me, that somebody who says, I don't think there's a problem because our overlords told us there wasn't, is literally not the kind of person who should be anywhere near the levers of power in Washington when we are heading off a cliff.
Yeah.
Can I just say,
agree. Yeah, fair enough.
If you are not a question asker, if you are not somebody, and I'm sorry, but I say all the time, like I grew up a Mormon in New York.
You do say that all the time.
I do say that all the time because that tells you so much about who I am.
Yeah, it does.
Right?
It does.
And I don't care like what your religious beliefs or background are. This is mine. And those experiences have made me who I am. Right? And that is, I don't care where the crowd's going. I have a whole bunch of questions and some red flags going off.
Yeah.
I need these questions answered. I have never been a person who you can come to me and say, hey, this is what like the government is saying, or this is what our teachers are saying. I mean, I was a rebellious teenager, but and maybe this is a part of what has made me who I am.
Yeah.
I am somebody who questions everything, and I need my questions answered because they're not stupid questions.
Right.
And anybody who resists answering smart questions is somebody I don't trust. Yeah. So all I can say is, I don't know, but why are we not answering legitimate questions? And I believe some people aren't asking legitimate questions. I think we do. You know, I use the term hardcore conservative. I am a hardcore conservative, but I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes we as hardcore conservatives get so caught up in being right that we forget a few things. We still have to work with people. We have to know how to talk to people in a way that shows respect for what, you know, they may not view things the way that we do, but we need to listen to why they don't. And then we need to explain to them why we believe our position is correct, right? And so we have to be able to do that. But we also, a lot of times, many in my own camp make this mistake. And that is, we have evidence of A, B, and C. And that's clear. It's data driven. I hate using that term, but it's fact-based. And so we think
it's measurable, right? Like we can measure it.
Yes. And we think that X is happening. And maybe that's too extreme. I said A, B, and C, F. We think that F is happening. So instead of continuing to gather data and ask questions, A, B, and C have been laid out for us. We jump straight to F.
Yeah, I see that a lot.
A lot.
And sometimes because you believe in F, you use A, B, and C it's a logical fallacy, right? You use A, B, and C to justify that F must also be true.
Yes.
When it might be correlated, but it's not causal. There might be some kind of connection. But I see this on the conservative side. It's on both sides. It's on the left and the right. But I see it maybe because I listen to the conservative side probably more so than I do the left and liberal side. I see that happen so often where I'm like, the logical jump that you just made from here to here, I know you might want this to be true. And it could
be true.
It could be true, but it doesn't mean it's a fact. You can't just keep running that direction, because then now we've spun up this belief, And because maybe people believe you and you've made that assumption, now you have a whole bunch of people now that believe that, right? Which we, whether it's Tucker Carlson or Glenn Greenwald over here, or, the political commentary, left or right, these guys make these, oftentimes will make these statements of belief of fact when that's not necessarily the case, but they just convinced all these people that they're like, well, they're smart, so they must be right. And there's a huge gap in the middle here.
Yeah, we can't have that. It discredits us. It discredits our case.
It does.
Right?
It really does.
And I think I can't trust people who make those jumps consistently, and I see it way more than I would like to see it.
Yeah, me too. Especially when they're in office. It's one thing to be a journalist or somebody who wants to just have their opinion be heard, right? But if you're actually a decision maker, if you're influencing policy, if you're influencing, these as a elected official, that's the last kind of person, truthfully, that I want to be representing, because I'd rather have a politician tell me they don't know. They just don't know. And that they're going to have to figure it out as they go along, than to continue to just say things that don't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
So that was actually helpful. I wish there was a way we could just go back to a simpler way of the electorate. I think it's really, really easy. It would be really easy. It's just going to take a bunch of people to agree that we made a mistake and we can go this other direction. But that kind of consensus to me is so difficult these days. And it's weird to me. It's weird that we can't make progress like that.
Well, and it makes no sense when it comes to voting, because the fact of the matter is we keep being told, and you made this point a minute ago, we keep being told that, technology makes things easier. Yet it's taking us longer to get our results than it ever did when we had paper ballots that people had to show up and cast.
And it's like nobody wants to believe that, but that's 100% true. 100% true.
So you probably know this then from what you've seen. I mean, I served a mission in Czechoslovakia right after the wall came down. Mm-hmm. My companion and I were the first sisters to go in there, and we saw what happens, kind of that degradation in society. It is not just economic destruction that you have when you have one narrative and centralized control, right? It is economic. It is the social fabric tearing apart. It is family relationships that are massively damaged because everyone's afraid everyone else is going to turn them into the government, even their own children. It is so destructive of absolutely everything. And now, I don't remember why I went here, because you had said something a minute ago.
Well, the electorate, like being able to admit we were wrong. And
like I just think that one narrative driving everything, again, this goes back to asking questions.
Yeah.
So I would ask people when I was there, like, did you guys believe Pravda? Because, the Russians had one news source, and that was the information that went out to all of the Soviet republics as well as Russia itself, right? Like, did you believe this? No, we didn't believe it. Now, certainly, I guarantee there were quite a few people who did, but I never met anyone who actually admitted to having believed it. But I look around in our society today, and I'm deeply disturbed at how many people don't read or consume news from various types of sources. Mm-hmm. I am a hardcore conservative because I've spent my life talking to people and reading what the other side has to say.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that we can get to the truth. If we are not willing to expose ourselves, and I don't mean people have to every single day, but if you haven't at least arrived at your fundamental conclusions by understanding why some people think differently, and then understanding that, what you believe is different. It's based on facts, and theirs might be based on emotion or feeling, which I think is often the case, right? Or an acceptance of what your end goal ultimately is, and theirs is something different. I mean, mine always comes back to the Constitution, because the Constitution is the only thing that can protect us, and it's losing this power because we're electing people who don't respect it. But it is the only thing that protects us from government force. Yet we have people who think the government's awful saying tear down the Constitution. They don't know what it is. Yeah. It's the only thing that keeps you from abuse by the powerful. Why would you want it gone, right? But all of this, I just think we're lost. first of all, I think it's an education issue with our schools, but and the federal government controlling too much of what we're being taught and our kids are being taught in public schools. But also just this whole, an overarching narrative that some people have trouble seeing beyond is just dangerous. It's damaging to society altogether. Yeah. And I think that's why there's this effort to shut down free speech in order to grow the narrative so that more people will be lost and confused.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a, it reminds me of the story of the Tower of Babel. It really does. Yep. And it sounds, if you're not Christian or if you don't know the story of the Tower of Babel, this will not make any sense to you whatsoever. But confusing and breaking down communication, right? Just mixing up somebody's words and doing that in an instant and across an entire populace, the chaos that ensues, right? So thinking of the falling of the wall, the USSR changing, and this is, I just listened to the entire Putin Tucker Carlson interview.
Oh, I haven't listened to that.
Oh my gosh. It for me, because I took a China politics, Russia-China politics class specifically when I was an undergrad at Cal State Fullerton. And it was so much of like, what he had talked about was flooding back to like my understanding and watching this happen in early, 2009 would have been when I took that class. And it was just fascinating because, to your point, we have this narrative that a single regime gets to dictate to their entire population over decades and decades and decades, and they can actually rewrite history at will, right? They can rewrite their own history at will. And so when you have this fall and you have this mass, basically this collapse of what is truth, what is this person saying, and you can't communicate clearly, it causes massive chaos. And we're kind of going through that here in the United States, but it's a global communication breakdown, which is just so crazy because technology, you'd think we got better at this.
Know.
Google Translate lets me talk into another language so easy now, but we still can't get it right. And it's fascinating to me. And all these problems, when you think about them from existentially, it's almost like, what do you do? Like, how does one person or how does one group make massive change? And the reality in my mind is we have to make small changes one step at a time. And keep fighting the good fight, right? It's just we can't give up hope. We got to keep driving. The rebel force wasn't always the rebel force, right? They were the rulers at one point, and then things change, and we're going through that right now. So bringing that to foreign policy. So let's get back to you're running for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
So you're going to the federal level, and what that means for the state of Utah is a lot. But when it comes to foreign policy, what do you think needs to change? Mitt Romney voted for additional funds just the other day to go towards Ukraine and Israel. How would you have voted over the last $140 billion that we've sent over to Ukraine? Yeah. Like maybe help me understand how you would have done that differently.
Yeah. Do you know the average age of a soldier in Ukraine right now?
I'm guessing it's like 18, but I don't know.
It's like 52.
Oh my goodness.
We have decimated their entire male population.
Yeah.
And that is us.
Yeah.
Because my understanding is that there were two opportunities early on in this war where Ukraine and Russia were ready to come to the table and settle. And we interrupted that. So that's strange, I got to say. We are wiping out their male population. We are wiping out our ability to defend our nation. There are some weapon systems that we are 7 years behind in production, and we have nothing on the ground, and we've sent it to Ukraine. And everyone knows that that's a losing war. And again, what are we doing to the population of that country? And what is the end game for us? Do you know that early on in this war, I've asked friends of mine who have supported this funding. Early on, I've said, okay, you support us backing up Ukraine in this war. Tell me what your goal is. It was always to restore the border. Do you know what Biden said the ultimate goal of this fight against Russia was? Do you even know?
I think it's Russia surrendering, right?
Regime change.
Yeah.
We literally said regime change openly.
Yeah.
I do not know a single
He says a lot
soul.
of things.
I
He
know.
says a lot of things.
But that was his administration's stated policy.
And when you say it, especially going back to listening to what Putin said, he's like, he believes. You say this thing, that's what he believes. Even, he multiple times he talked about how we have signatures on the Minsk agreements between Ukraine and Russia. He's like, they signed saying that they agreed to it. And then weeks later, they said the exact opposite and that there was nothing they agreed to. And he's like, your words are the only thing that matter then. Like, you can sign papers all day long, but what you say is what I have to operate and run my country based off of what you say. And I can't argue with him on that. Because if we say one thing, or we write down on a piece of paper we're going to do one thing, but we say something else, people are going to take you for your word. That's what, I mean, in my mind. But,
No, I'm going to have to listen to that. But also, do you remember too, we were told, Russia said, if I remember correctly, I swear they came out and said it, or I heard this from some source that I trusted early on, that Russia had said that if we stopped pushing NATO with Ukraine, that they would back off. They felt threatened, and we never should have done that. But again, I don't know.
It's a little Monday morning quarterback, right?
Yeah, but it seems as though, no, but a lot of people were saying that at the time. Stop trying to pull them into NATO, because they'd agreed. We were putting pressure on Ukraine to enter NATO, and then Russia would have been surrounded by NATO. Now, explain to me why we even have NATO. Right. Because NATO was to push back against an expanding Soviet empire. Right. That empire fell apart, 30 years ago. Why do we have NATO? By the way, why are we funding it? I think it's time for Europe to step up if they believe that that is a threat that they need to guard against. I don't think that Russia's a good player, right? Right. It's not our job. They have not been an expanding force for decades. Yeah. So anyway, that's even another discussion, right? So we've decimated their male population. We've greatly hurt our own ability to defend our own country. And one of the absolute most important fundamental duties of our federal government is to protect this nation. Right. I don't think we would be able to do that if we needed to right now. Just southern border's the perfect example.
Well, going back to what you said about A, B, and C being true, and then we wanting F, it's almost like we're using the justification for, well, if we don't do this in Ukraine, we can't protect our borders, right? It's like it's that logical fallacy jump that we're making. It's crazy.
It's absolutely silly. That bill was a joke, and I could run down a number of things that were a problem. Do you know what the scariest thing is that I don't hear anyone talking about? So most of us realize that the executive branch has taken a whole bunch of powers from the legislative branch, and the legislative branch has acquiesced, right? Yeah. We have all these agencies that essentially make law. Their regulations can strip us of life, liberty, and property. Right. And they are not elected officials, and that is not how we're constitutionally established. Right. But it has happened for decades. We've allowed it. The legislative branch has allowed it. So I was unaware of this until the language for that bill came out on Sunday, I think. And I came across something that said, so currently when illegal aliens enter the country, this has been going on for about at least a decade. I've been aware of it, or a little more, that they should declare asylum, right? Because if they declare asylum, my understanding from some federal officials recently is that the executive branch is to hold them until the adjudication of their case. We don't do that. Right. We had the Remain in Mexico policy under Trump, but Biden got rid of that. And now these people are not held. Probably up to 10 million illegal aliens over the past 3.5 years have come into our country, and they are all over the place. And they, many of them, if they've claimed asylum, they've been given papers as to when they need to show up in court, right? So judges adjudicate those cases. Most of those cases do not qualify for asylum, so they need to be deported. We never deport. Okay, here's the
ICE is not allowed to deport them either. Additionally, so really? So from what I understood, this is from an ICE. This isn't from an ICE agent. Under Obama, they eliminated the ability for ICE to deport them. They couldn't do it. Trump came into office. They were allowed to deport them. The minute Biden took office, they took the ability, the ICE could not deport them. They were not allowed to. It was official. It was like the policy that they were not allowed to deport them.
Okay, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it's wild.
That's horrific.
It's wild. It
now
doesn't make any
get
sense.
this. Now get this. Now we have, so in the language of the bill, it says it codifies an executive order that Biden had put out. I think it was in 2022. I was totally unaware of it. I'd never heard of it before until this bill language was released. And people were saying, oh, it'll codify that awful executive order. That executive order takes judicial power and puts it in the executive branch. Do you know what it's called when all government power is housed in one branch?
Yeah.
There's a word for that.
Tyranny, right?
Yeah, that is tyranny.
Tyranny. That's
probably the nicest word you could come up with.
Yeah.
So what this bill would have done is take that executive order and codify it where you then have Mayorkas's agents making the decision. Remember, judges, especially outside of like the San Francisco circuit, what's that, the Ninth Circuit Court? Mm-hmm. Judges outside of that circuit did not have a high rate of awarding asylum because they did not meet the definition. It's very specific. Mm-hmm. So now they're just going to let the executive branch decide. How many of us trust that? They're already defying the laws that are on the books. Right. They are completely flouting them. They are refusing to do their job. Through executive orders, they're taking legislative authority. Now they're taking judicial authority. How is this not recognized, and how is our media not absolutely freaking out over this?
Well, because there's only like 2 media outlets that are allowed to talk about anything anymore.
Yeah,
but I guess so then as a legislative body, you know, we have this. We have to have some kind of reckoning to where we're changing out, these seats of these people, right? Which thankfully Mitt Romney is not rerunning, so we don't have to boot him from office. He gets to just electively remove himself from office. But there's still it's a big class of there's 435 members of the House, right? There's 100 senators, and you know it's not moving in the right direction. We're definitely in a stalemate from a power perspective. So thinking of how do we start building these coalitions? How do we start making this progress? It seems like a big challenge to you. In your mind, who are those coalitions that are growing? Or when you get onto you're going to be a junior senator, mm-hmm. right? Who do you go to? Where are the groups that you found that are making progress now?
Federally? You know, there are a bunch of them.
Maybe it's a tough question, too.
Yeah.
That's a tough question.
I don't know that I can identify specific groups, although there are a bunch of organizations that are putting out policy positions that I agree with. Mm-hmm. But as far as, I think a lot of work needs to be done within the body. And I'll mm-hmm. tell you, progress is being made over time. So you talk about a stalemate, mm-hmm. kind of.
Okay.
Well, superficially, there's a stalemate. There's a lot that's going on to grow the conservative base, mm-hmm. which is what is needed to make changes in leadership mm-hmm. and in policy. And that is more visible in the House, less visible in the Senate. But I think just in the past few weeks, we've seen some things that to me make it much more visible. And that is a growing group and body as more and more states. And I think people are getting to the point where they're willing to change out some of the people who have been representing them mm-hmm. to a greater degree, hopefully, mm-hmm. or elect a different kind of person. Mm-hmm. And so that will build. So I was talking to a friend of mine in the Senate who told me that really you have a growing body of conservatives within the Senate conference, within the Senate Republican conference. That's what's needed. And that has been growing as sentiment among the public has changed. So it's a slow process. And it's what you talk about that you mentioned a few minutes ago. Like none of this happens overnight. We didn't get here overnight. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I've recognized that there is this very universal desire by mankind mm-hmm. to have a temporal savior as well. We want someone to come in and just fix it all. Mm-hmm. And even, you know, sometimes I'll find myself like philosophically looking at solutions to some of these problems with the assumption that that's the way to do it. You can't. You never will. And we're in this position because too many people looked to the federal government to be their savior in so many areas of their lives. Centralized power is always corruption on steroids. There's no way around it.
Or it just takes time until it gets corrupted, right?
Yeah.
So it's like they're the good guy until they're there long enough to where they're no longer the good guy. Right?
Yeah.
They just end up getting corrupted.
Yes.
And that's the point of the balance of the powers, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Both between federal and state. And that's why most of the powers, I think, were housed within the state and the people as opposed to the federal government, right? The Constitution is very clear on that. But we have a federal government that's doing so many things that they are not even supposed to be touching.
And aren't good at any of them. They're not good at any
No. And you've probably heard me say this before, too. The more government does those things that are not their fundamental duty, the more they fail at those things that are.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Always. I remember Rocky Anderson. This idea first came to me when he was mayor of Salt Lake, and he was the mayor, and he instituted some climate change initiative. And my thought was, pick up the dang garbage, dude.
Yeah.
Right? That is your job. And then I started noticing this all over around me. As governments reached into areas that were not their purview, they started crumbling on the things that were always. And I have a friend in the legislature, formerly in the legislature. And when I would say this kind of thing to her, she's always like, Carolyn, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm like, then how come you've never done it successfully? And it's not your job. It's not what we want you doing. But never has a government done it well.
Yeah.
Ever.
Right. Yeah. And it's proof. The proof is where we're at the moment right now. So what's your hard stop? It's 4:53.
Okay. It is 5 because I'm being picked up to go to another event.
You're good. This is a great conversation. We could talk for hours.
I know we could. That
you
is
could
the
always
problem
talk,
with me.
You can always talk for hours.
Hey, wait a minute. Was that a slam? I can always talk for hours.
Yeah. I think somebody who's knowledgeable and has good energy, high energy, that feels strongly about things, because you could tell you're passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
I could talk for hours about the things I'm passionate about too, right? And so and it's clear.
Yeah.
So we didn't talk about budget. We didn't talk about
my gosh.
Nobody knows anything about you.
I know, because we just had all these conversations.
We got into this conversation like, I don't even know if I like Carolyn. She seemed really nice. Yeah. So what's one other thing? Let's leave somebody. We talked a little bit. I think you kind of made a little point on education in there. You made definitely a point on government overreach, and we talked a little bit about decentralization of the government. Smaller government is what I'm hearing you say in that. We talked about a little bit. You could see that we're on the wrong track. It's okay. We're on the wrong track in Ukraine. From a foreign policy perspective, what's one other thing that if somebody's listening in, what's going to differentiate you from the rest of these middle-aged men that are running? I don't know if that was on when we were rolling, but what's aside from that, what's going to differentiate you from the Republicans that are it's one of the 9 or however many, right?
It is consistent long-term allegiance to constitutional principles. We have got to restore this nation to the constitutional principles on which it was founded. And we need somebody who intrinsically understands and believes those and has proven that through history. How are you different from them?
Because I think they're going to say the same thing.
Okay, yeah, I know. I tell people all the time, we're all going to say the same things. You have to ask the right questions.
I know.
Right?
I'm not very good at that.
No. This wasn't a point at you.
No, I'm just kidding.
But that is the truth, right? If you look at the hard fights that I fought when I worked for Speaker Hughes and when I worked for Mike Lee, consistently, I was in the right place despite all the pressure. Now, those are things that happen behind the scenes. Yeah. So it's different. I think if you dig into, and you can even get this by asking questions of other candidates, do they understand it, believe in it, and care about it to the degree that I do? It's just a slam dunk. The answer is no. Now, if you were to talk to my former bosses, they would tell you the same thing from their experience about that consistency. But that's not something I can prove to anybody outside of what they hear when they listen to me. And that is, there is nothing about this that is me seeking for power. I built a greenhouse last year and bought chickens, man. That is what I would like to be spending my time doing. And I'm hoping that somebody eventually brings me grandchildren, right?
Yeah.
So there are things that I'd like to be doing with my time that have nothing to do with this. But we are at like a crisis point in our nation's history. And if we don't have people who understand that big picture, that's something else that's often missing. Understand that big picture instead of the talking points that people think people want to hear. And you laid out that example when it comes to elections. I know those issues. I've dug into those issues. I don't know them as well as people who like spend a ton of time on that one particular thing. But I'm not a politician. And the other guys are going to give you a response like a politician. Oh, we're good. Our leaders told us so.
Yeah, right.
That is not me. I am who I am. You can listen to me and you listen to a few things. I'm never scripted. Yeah. This is all stuff that I know and believe, like firmly believe in. I would not be wasting my time doing this if I didn't think that we have got to wake up and have leaders who believe in the principles of this nation and will fight for them, because we are not at a position where we can afford to do the easy things anymore. We have politicians who say all the time, I know how to get things done. I'm going to go back to Washington and get things done. That is the very reason we are $34 trillion in debt, because you got a whole bunch of things done. All that is left is the hard things. There is nothing easy to do. Yeah. And if we don't have people who have consistently shown that they understand that and will fight for that, and I don't mean when the tide has already begun to turn among the public, because that's what I see over and over and over with politicians. There are things that I've seen years down the road politicians take credit for after a number of years, standing up or passing a bill or doing something. But I watched how for a year, 2 years, 3 years before, they fought it, they killed it, they spent their time doing other things because it didn't matter to them until the people rose up. And then it's like, let me get in front of this group of people because I can get something for this. Yeah. That is what we keep electing. People have got to have the ability to discern the difference between a politician and me. I don't know a better way to lay that kind of thing out. Yeah. And the firm belief in history in actually accomplishing the hard things is there with me more than anybody else.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Good.
That was very helpful, at least for me too. Just one-on-one, right? Nobody else is listening. Yeah. That was helpful for me. I appreciate the time you spent with me. I want to wish you the best of luck. Are you gathering signatures or are you going straight caucus?
Straight convention, man. I can do it, and I plan to have 60% coming out, because here's the beauty. 60+%, we get one candidate coming out of convention against 3 or 4 signature gathering candidates that totally dilute that 40% of the vote. That is the magic where we can finally overcome what that SB 54 gave us in signature gathering. Let all the self-funders fight it out among each other. And let's have one candidate coming out of convention to win the day.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Awesome.
Glad to hear you're doing it. Okay, good luck. Have a great dinner.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again. I want you back on because we have so much more to talk about.
I know we do. I will be back anytime.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.